and you should get
Oh
some
dear.
is it okay to record?
Okay.
Okay, awesome. Welcome to See.Mom.Learn. This is our very first of several interviews. We heard a lot of feedback and said, hey, we'd like some of the formats to include centering voices in the homeschool community, folks that really influence the way that people are choosing books, and here we are. So I'm Tahira Golson, lifelong learner, instructional designer, and homeschool enthusiast. I would love for our guests to introduce themselves, and then we'll just kind of dive right in.
Okay.
Shelley, go ahead.
Yep. So I'm Shelly Suzuki. I have two kids. We've been doing homeschool from the very beginning. The biggest reason that the two biggest reasons we wanted to homeschool, one was for language, because so many times it's really hard to maintain a minority language when kids start school. And the other is I spent a lot of time bored when I was in school myself. I have a very interesting school history, but I just thought that it would be more interesting. And then a few years before we began, we discovered Charlotte Mason and her ideas. I was like, yes, yes. So my youngest is in year 7 and my oldest is in year 10. No, year 9. Scaring myself.
No worries, no worries.
I'm planning year 10.
Oh, of course. This is the season.
It is. Yes.
So I'm Arleth Plander. No, I'm not. I'm Arleth Comper. I've only been married 10 years, but I have it. So I'm mom and housewife. My son, actually, he attends school. We homeschooled for about a year and a half, but he's in school. We currently live in Singapore, but lived in Macau for a little over 15 years. That's where I met my husband. And my son was born, well, strictly speaking, in Hong Kong, but he had only ever lived in Macau. And I discovered Charlotte Mason, stumbled across Charlotte Mason, mostly because I didn't know how to be a parent, and I didn't have any adults who I trusted and knew well in Macau. So I had no idea what I was doing. I started reading and fell in love with her for many reasons. And yeah, I guess when it comes to partnering with Shelley, one of the big drivers for me is awareness of how absolutely clueless and walking disaster I was when I first got to.
I love it.
Things that I didn't know. So.
No, I appreciate those introductions because one of the things I find remarkable about Charlotte Mason is I was like, she was really detailed about parenting and about education, and she was unencumbered with having to parent. Like she was
Right.
all in. And especially with her family background, I find it really dynamic that she was able to produce the work that she was doing. So I came to know you both virtually in a group that is Charlotte Mason. It focuses on Charlotte Mason method and really champions books from the public domain. And there's a large community there. And then I kept seeing this Facebook group recommended, Living Books for All People. And it wasn't you two that were recommending it. And I was like, what is this Facebook group? Why does it keep coming up? So I want to ask you, how would you describe Living Books for All People? And then how did each of you come to be co-creators or partners in Living Books for All People, the Facebook group?
So I think, when did this begin? 6 years ago, 7 years ago? There were people asking questions in many different Facebook groups about different voices. Where are the Kenyan history books, and where are the books that are great books for the Navajo people? And the same few books kept getting recommended over and over again. And then people would say there must be other books, and sort of, I don't know, somewhere along the line someone said, why isn't there a Facebook group for this? And so I was like, well, I could do that. I'm interested. And around that time I had looked at my own personal library, and I felt like we were very aware of the world and very diverse and very multicultural. But when I looked at the books in my library, I realized that 95% of them were written by people from England
Mm.
or America. And that really surprised me. So so I think the need for books, there's so many great websites that tell you the Western books. There's like such a great canon of wonderful books, but we were trying to find some of the other books that we knew must be out there, but we didn't know where they were. So
Awesome. I appreciate that.
And then for me, Shelley and I were in a Charlotte Mason group together. So I had sort of seen that conversation in that
Uh,
Charlotte Mason group, but also elsewhere. It's because I've lived in Macau for so long. I had a sort of a different perspective
mhm.
on history classes, I guess, at least as delivered in the US, history and geography and what all the gaps are. And so I'm not always the most politic person. So I would get a little bit frustrated. But anyway, so then Shelley said she was going to launch a group, and I joined. And then in the group, she was looking for anyone who might want to assist. So I sent her a message and said I would. The rest is history, I guess.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I think it's really remarkable the way that the group is moderated. I know we mentioned this in our pre-call, but I think it's so challenging when you're building an online community. A lot of times when you're building community in person, you have something in common that has basically pre-screened folks from being there, right? Like if you have an event at your public library, it's probably your neighbors who are going to show up. And so I think you just do a really fantastic job that I've witnessed in the group of holding a space for hard conversations um, without shutting down the conversation. And I think that when I've come in online communities, they're really good at one or the other, right? Like either they're really good at staying targeted on what the goal of the group is, or they're really good at opening and creating spaces and community where everyone feels the ability to share. So I just think it's really interesting what you're doing there. I just wonder, like, for each of you, what you were thinking about in terms of, like, what is the goal of Living Books for All People? Not just like in the microscopic way of, like, hey, we've been asking about books with broader diversity of voices or more varied backgrounds. Where are they, right? But do you think that there is like a broader goal or ideal purpose with the group? And then how do you think we're doing with achieving it? Like I know it's crowdsourced, right?
Mhm.
So everybody
Yeah.
has a stake in it who's in the group. So I'm wondering what you're thinking about like bigger impact and it or if you've thought about it. Like maybe that's not something that's on your mind.
I think that I would love to see. So as you said, it's crowdsourced. So we have regional threads, and the regional threads are only as good as the contributions of
Mhm.
people. So we try to read in all kinds of areas, but then sometimes we'll have a person with amazing insight into a region. And I think that's it's something I always apologize to people when they come. Like if they're looking for a particular book for a particular region, and we don't have someone who's read and found great books, I always feel sad. But I'm like, but you can do it. You can add. So I think one of the I love that we do have an atmosphere where hard conversations can happen. I love that we can talk about when a book that I love, someone else says, what did you think about? Did you think about this other aspect? That we can have that conversation and learn from it. For me, sometimes when I'm talking about the group to people in my real life, I'm excited about that. Like we had this really tough conversation. It was so awesome. I love it. And so I think for me, one of the goals is first, let's find more books. I know that for me, finding books in Latin America has been a challenge. I haven't found anything. I found a few, like maybe two or three, but it seems like it's really difficult for me as I'm looking for books for school or reading books to find that. And my guess is because they're not translated and I don't speak Spanish, that's the big thing keeping us back. But I think I would just love to see more people who have found an awesome book share it, um, to gather more information. And then there are different groups that can take that information and they can develop curriculums, or they can develop, there's a wonderful Stories of Color group that has an amazing database that you can search with all sorts of different aspects. So I think it's exciting when people, if they can use what we have in our library to do something specific to a region or broader, or just add to the information for other people to find.
I love it. Thanks, Shelley. And Ardith, did you have some ideas about what you're hoping, like maybe the broader impact of the group is?
Yeah, I do actually. Although Shelley and I haven't talked about this, so she might be
Okay, tell me,
surprised.
tell me.
Honestly speaking, my fantasy is that we get to a point where it's so normal
Yes.
that our group just dies.
Yeah.
Normal everywhere, to as an adult, but also as a teaching parent, just when you read a news headline to think about, oh, well, what's the opponent's perspective on this? Like, how did we end up in this position of conflict? Which is not the same as saying that the opponent is correct, right? Charlotte Mason says that we should be entering with an open but not empty mind. And I would like to see that, beyond the dominant white Anglo and Anglo-American canon, I guess, canon. I don't know, something like that. But yeah, if we can get to the point where, even in places that are standard Charlotte Mason, that it's normal when somebody mentions Little House on the Prairie, automatically a more experienced homeschool parent says, oh yes, and you'll want to read Birch Bark Castle. Not in a conflict type of way, just because, you want to have a fuller picture of whatever is going on. So that's sort of my dream. I don't know if we'll ever get there though. Humans are human.
And I think it's exciting too, though. It's exciting because I've seen that begin to happen.
Yeah.
I feel like 2020 was a transformational year for the country as well, for us here in the US. But in publishing, it seems like since then, in English speaking publishing around the world, there's so many more voices being heard. I don't know, are they really being heard, or it's just that I'm better at finding them? I'm not sure. But I feel like in groups as well, when people ask for books, there's a wider range of recommendations now. That it's not only the same 2 or 3 books that get recommended, but people are reading more. And I don't know that that's due to us, but it's exciting. So I agree with Ardith. If what we are doing becomes so common, there's so many resources where you can find this, that'd be great. That would be amazing.
Right. I mean, yeah, I think I've thought a lot about this group and the way that I see, of course, there are like many groups that are bibliophiles or doing things different way, but my particular interaction with this group, I've thought about it and I'm like, oh, wait, like I feel like the group that we were originally connected in is directly impacted and influenced by the body of work that's kind of being curated in Living Books for All People. And I work so I work with a mindfulness coach, right? And one of the questions that they ask, like when you get stuck, is they're like, well, how can you make your week like 5% better, like 5% closer to what your goals are? And so I feel like in this group, even if we're like moving the 5% closer to thinking about broader voices, considering what it means for a book to have value in terms of it being own voice, then I think that's pretty remarkable. I'll share like 2 things in terms of my own evolution as a parent that Charlotte Mason method has helped me develop, but I've kind of see it played out, amplified exponentially in some of my interactions in the group. So one thing is when it comes to broader voices, one of the big challenges for me as a mom is like I'm afraid to get it wrong. And so, of course, we have homeschool amplifies that even more, right? right?
Yeah.
But like I was like, oh, okay, we're almost to kindergarten and we're going to talk about like the first Thanksgiving and we're going to talk about the real story and it's going to be awesome. And so so I like went to all these groups and I was like, okay, first Thanksgiving, real story. And I had books that were recommended that were by indigenous authors, right? And so I got this first round of books and we went through, hey, here is a counter story, or here's a more authentic story, or here's an own voice story. And then maybe a month later, I saw posts around and they were like, hey, this author who says that they're indigenous,
Oh
they're
yeah.
really known very well for not being indigenous. And I was like, oh, I got it wrong. But it was at like 5% closer, where I think one of the huge benefits of like being well read and your own personal development as you are parenting is that you then get to take that journey. Instead of teaching, hey, here is the box and I'm handing you this box, right? You're handing the process. So it
Mm,
was really a privilege to be able the next year to say, okay, we found better titles, we found better resources. Let's
mm,
dive in. So I think one of the biggest obstacles for me in terms of diversifying my bookshelf is like, oh, but what if I pick wrong? Like these books that have been around like hundreds of years and many people agree on them, that aren't new titles to me or to the folks
mm,
around me, are proven. And some of those don't work for our family, but at least they don't work for lots of people and we keep recommending. Like that's kind of what the alternative is for not switching it up. I wonder how you feel about kind of the canon, right, of what it means, like, because Charlotte Mason overlaps sometimes with classical education, although there's some real differences there. I think for me in my reading, and I'll be interested if you feel differently about this. With Charlotte Mason, she's kind of pointing to the canon, but she's saying all of it points back to like the wonder of creation or the wonder of God, right? And I think in classical, purely classical circles, it really is pointing back to like the genius of individual or the genius of region. And so I wonder how you feel about this kind of active rebranding or redefining the canon for your own household, but then, I mean, really for community, for next generations. Like, do you feel like that's scary for you? Do you feel like you welcome it and you're hoping to throw out all of these books? Like, how does that work in community and in your household? But how do you feel about like this long legacy of books that have been recommended within our circle, and how you're broadening that circle or switching some books out for books that may be the best that we had at the time and now we have something better?
Hmm.
yeah. Go ahead.
Can I go first this time?
Yeah, go, go, go,
So
go.
much to say on this topic. Okay, so I might ruffle some feathers here, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm 48 now, so I have a lot of experience with this. Here's what I have discovered or recognized over the last sort of 10 years, I guess. And that is that the canon is not necessarily canon because it is the best or wisest that was ever written. It is canon because people who could afford to and
Mm,
also enjoyed what those had to say paid money to keep it going.
mm,
That's what canon is, right?
mm,
So, all the way back to the ancient Greeks,
mhm,
the patron who is paying for some artist to create something, and then it's a status issue. So, of course, it has to be somewhat complementary, at least the patron's
mm,
worldview. And then the patron shares it with his buddies or her buddies. And they're like, oh, this says everything I wanted to know, like I feel great. And I feel like I've grown a little bit, but not everything about me is horrible. I had to tell my kids, and on and on and on for
mm,
centuries and generations. Now, that doesn't mean that everything in the canon is horrible or that we have nothing to learn from it. But I am concerned about the reverence
mhm,
around the Western, this idea that all the ideas of the 5,000 years before us have gone through some kind of a sieve, and the only thing that's left is the best of the best. And that's not true. It has gone through a sieve. But what's left is what appeals the most. And we don't know what we don't know. Sorry to be all Rumsfeld here, right? But unknown unknowns, right? Who knows about all of those books or speeches or plays that were made that didn't resonate with the moneyed class, that didn't make it to us. So when we look now, especially now, at what I think is a golden age of children's literature, there are economically, there are much more diverse demographics driving the profitability, but also just, the noise around a given product. And I think that's a big part of the seeing, it's not that there were no Native American poets. I'm sure that there were, but those 19th century white guys in the Indian Affairs Bureau were not concerned about making sure that they translated it and published it accurately. One or two, maybe, but in terms of like making sure that got included in ongoing education wasn't a priority. And that's just human nature, I think. So in some ways, we're working against the current right now. But I like to think as the global middle class continues to expand, that this will become more and more normal, that voices which are not just the wealthy are influencing A's and B's. So there we
I
go.
really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that's some echoing. Sorry.
Oh, let me try muting and let's.
Am I still echoing? Okay. So one of the things that I think is incredible is like Beowulf. Beowulf was one of the only manuscripts that survived. And only one or two copies of it survived, I think. So we have this book that's an amazing way to look into that time period, but there was only the one copy. And so then you think of the libraries that were destroyed, like all the Chinese history that was destroyed, all the Alexandria, all the stelas from the different groups, when the Spanish came into South America, and you think of all the literature of the world that we don't have. And it's not, we don't have it. So it's not like, I don't know, I'm not big on lamentation. I don't, but I think to myself how awesome it is to find what survived, like to be the person who discovers the Beowulf of some other group. And then to know, like we did at one point, we had a question where we asked people what were some children's authors that everyone in their country knew. And it was fascinating to learn the children's authors in other countries. There's so much we don't, the canon has great books in it, and we read in the canon, but the canon is just one part of the world. And there's a canon of books that people in Poland revere and that people in other countries are interested in and read and know. Everybody knows the story of this, where was it? Well, the Persian epic, but there's another area, maybe Hungary, the creation myth kind of Hungary, and everyone knows, and everyone. So I think the canon is great, but the canon is it's limited, and so it's really exciting to see what has informed the rest of the world. And then it's, of course, once you start looking, you realize how much overlap there is and how much connection there is, and how it's not even just like seeing things from the other side. It's the connections of the world, like the Haitian Revolution, for example. Ardith and I last week were talking about a book that my son has just started to read that was just amazing for me to realize how much the revolution of Haiti was, how much that impacted the United States of America, how much that was impacted by France. It impacted France. The role that the Haitian Revolution played really in then the revolutions that continued in Europe. I didn't know that. I didn't know. So it's
Well,
exciting.
and in U.S. history, because
And in
the
US
Haitian
history.
Revolution was in
We got really upset. We're like, no.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, but
but
also the
Yeah.
Louisiana Purchase would never have happened if
Mhm.
not for the Haitian War of Revolution, I guess, War of Independence. That book is so good. Go ahead, say the title. I'd like to
Oh,
hear
I
it.
love it. Do you remember? Because we can put it in our
Um,
notes if you don't remember the title. Okay.
we remember,
The
but I'm
Black
gonna
Jacobins
mispronounce.
Oh, I like it. Okay.
by
Come
C.L.R.
to
James.
Living Books for All People in order to find out. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
But
right.
I
Well,
think,
I recently posted about it.
yes, I think you both make really excellent points. There was another way that I think you kind of touched on. This is like tangential but related. I talked about before being afraid to get it wrong and kind of seeing
Mm,
examples in the groups of like different iterations. But I also the group really inspired me to search. So I think when I was in communities where people are like, if I ask a question, they're like, that doesn't exist. Yeah, that doesn't exist. Yeah, it was probably burned up, or it was a very oral culture, and so that doesn't exist, right? Then even if I don't believe that here, like I start to internalize it a little bit. One thing that helps with groups where everybody is searching is it inspired me to search. So there was a find that I had. I was looking for African American literature in the public domain. And because I think this idea of accessible education and things that are in the public domain is really attractive and pivotal, because we have this idea. I don't know if it's Western or US, but it's like if you can afford education, you can have it. And not, hey, there's all this stuff that belongs to us as the public. So I found a school like anthology um, or a reader from the 1920s, and it was from one room schoolhouses, but it was from a colored one room schoolhouse. So it had stories that were appropriate for really young kids up to like really college level reading, all in this reader in the public domain. And I was like, this exists. And so I was like, well, if this exists, and then I read another contributor, and that person was researching African American literary societies in the US in the 1920s and turn of the century. And I was like, I didn't, what? So I think it's really interesting the idea that we can be on this continual search and then report back. And I know that both of you mentioned that as about a goal. And then the second thing that you both touched on that I think is valuable before I ask your last couple of questions, but when we talk about the canon of stories, right? Like we talk the canon of books, right? But the canon of like shared experience, and I think like that folklore, fairy tale, fables, like those things are so unique from like community to community. And with Charlotte Mason talking about education being the science of relation, if we don't get to experience other bodies of work, we have blinders on and being able to make those connections and be able to relate. And this is a really simple story. So I know you're an expat, but I used to be a traveling trainer for the State Department. And so I went to Germany. So I'm still Western world, right? And they were like, oh, you obviously know this story of President Kennedy coming and addressing us and like making this big faux pas. And I was like,
About the Ich bin
I
ein Berliner.
yes. And I was like,
Yeah,
no, that's not a story they would tell. Like they would not tell a story about a president not in the Georgia public school system. Like that's not happening. And so I've told this story to several people, and the people who like my friends who I had one person who was like, I know that story. And I was like, how do you know this story? And she was like, well, I took German for 3 years, and like that was it in our German class. But the idea that it was so endearing, like the mistake wasn't, ha ha, the US is the butt of the joke, right? It was, how endearing that you would try to address us in our own language and make such a like a funny mistake and not be like angry about it, like that we could all laugh together. I think it's like a story we need to hear about like the humanity of leadership that doesn't get shared a lot.
Yeah.
I know that you mentioned Latin America and looking for more resources there. And we've been doing, in addition, we kind of pull, I would call us Charlotte Mason eclectic, but we've been working with a curriculum, Oh Freedom. We just started doing
Yeah, I
some of the
love
books
that.
there.
Yeah.
And I was reading it and so we did a whole unit. The whole fall was on Indigenous people in Mesoamerica. And I
Mm.
was starting to get really upset because I was like, how are these facts things that I never, and of course, there's a valid place for erasure. But when I started to look at like the archaeological digs that I'm teaching about, they're like in the early and mid 90s. Like I would not have been taught about it at my daughter's age because they hadn't
Thank-
happened yet.
Mm.
So I want to ask you,
Yeah.
what do you wish more people knew about diverse stories?
I love what you said, that it's not that you didn't, the reason that you didn't learn about it in school was because some of this stuff hadn't happened. And I think some books haven't been published. So I think what I would love for people to know is that there are books out there, there are readers in every country. There are people who are passionate. You know, living books, you talk about the author who's passionate about their topic. Um, I think I thought it was hard to find books, and now I'm at a place where I have too many books that I want to read. I think the biggest thing is that they're out there. There are people, or you know, Charlotte Mason says that we want to introduce children so that they'll know that other countries have their poets, have their great thinkers, have their people that are the same but different. And I think that's the encouragement and the thing I'd like to have people know. It's exciting to learn to look, to find resources, to find curated bookstores and groups that love literature in their region and want to share it with people, and that we get to learn from them. So I think that's mine. It's out there and it's fun to find it.
It's like a treasure hunt.
Yeah.
Did you did you have thoughts on that, Ardith, or is that summing it up for that one?
I think she covered most of it, but the thing I would add is, one understandable concern of all homeschooling families, but even schooling families, is that there's only so much time. And there is a sense of a zero sum game when it comes to choosing books, because you can't read 24/7. And even if you could, you still couldn't read them all. So when it comes to having diversity, diverse voices, or being more inclusive with childhood education, and especially in a Charlotte Mason situation, I'm going to bring it back to what you had to say about the folktales and fairy tales to hear it. And that is, geography is a natural place for us to swap out the old readers and use some of these folk and fairy tales from different cultures uh, for our cultural geography. Because as you and Shelley both said, these are stories that everybody who grew up there, they just know. You know what I mean? It was in the cartoons on TV. It was in the picture books that their parents read to them when they were growing up. It was in the puppets when they were little, like really little. Like they just know it. And if we read one story, short story, fable or whatever it might be, as we're examining that area of physical geography, then we are touching the cultural geography without massively increasing the workload in elementary school. So that's what I would say about, at least for young kids, a way to try to address this need to get multiple lenses and yet not have a 60-hour school week.
And
That's
biographies too are a great way to do
oh
that.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great points. Um, you'll love this. But we've mentioned so many books. So this question is, what's one book that changed your world book as a person? Oh, your worldview as a person or as a mom, and why?
Okay, I'll
It's
go
gonna
first, I
be
guess.
harder, yes.
Okay, well, Shelley and I talked about this question actually, because we're like, one book? I don't know where to start. Um, it's difficult for me to choose one for both a mom and a person as a whole. So I'm going to pick a person as a whole. And the book I'm going to choose is This Earth of Mankind, which is historical fiction set in Dutch Indonesia just before World War II, at a time when the Japanese were thriving, and Asia was looking to Japan with great hope that there was going to be an Asian empire, to get rid of the uh, not nice European imperial presence. And when I was reading that book, I'd never read anything from Indonesia before, ever. When I was reading it, I started to recognize so many parallels between what is being expressed in this narrative by this young man who is this local boy educated at a Dutch school, befriends a girl who is mixed heritage. Her dad is Dutch and her mom is local, right? I'm reading all this and I'm realizing how much of what is in here is applicable to, like, happened in other regions too. But the fact that it was a region that I didn't have pre-existing education or a heart connection to, I didn't have an emotional reaction beyond the bounds of the text. So, I was able to think about the boy and feel sad for him and see, like, his difficulties with identity and all that stuff. But because it wasn't my place and none of them were my people that I had been, internalizing a narrative about for 30 something years, it sort of like opened my eyes to these things that are also present in US history and English history, things that I knew but passed over. So for me, that was the big one. That was when I was like, oh my gosh, Asian people were excited about the Empire of Japan before, December 8th here, 1941. What? It blew my mind. And that is when I really was like, I got to get on the stick with this. There's so much that I have a completely wrong paradigm, as it's so narrow. My understanding is so narrow. And so, yeah, that's when I took on a lot more bookish research for myself, and also really became focused for my son about doing a better job by him than was done by me in my.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much for that. And Shelley, did you pick a title among your many, many titles
I
that are favorites?
I had trouble. I have a list of like 25 books and then authors. It's easier to pick an author that like so authors that have transformed me as a person would be George MacDonald and C.S. Lewis and Madeleine. Um a, and then there's this prayer that was written about the El Salvadorian Archbishop Oscar Romero, and that has been probably for 35 years has been sort of this like very central to who I am. But one of the books that's transformed me as a homeschool mom, Ardith and I were doing slowly reading through some books about Mexico, and this Mexico reader that was very dense, but it was so interesting how it was so Mexicans viewing themselves and talking about their national identity. And from that, getting to the book Broken Spears, and all the archaeological evidence, all the firsthand information about the Spanish conquest from people who lived there. And that just for me, that was amazing to realize all of this information. But then I think the other really big one is there's a book called A Broken Flute that um, is written. It came out of several people. It's connected to the group now, American Indians in Children's Literature. And A Broken Flute has a section on how to judge a good book, how to know, is this book about Native peoples going to be a good one? And it also has sections on the experience of children in the classroom when teachers were sharing a book that was not good. And that book has reviews in it for specific books, which I go back to and I read. But I think the first 2 or 3 sections of that book, how it felt when your history isn't being, when someone else is telling your story and they're not getting it right, and how to look at a book and evaluate it was really impactful. And my kids are Japanese and American, and you know, we get stereotypes of what Japan is, or people telling them things about Japan that are wrong, and like, but no, this is true. So I could resonate with some of the things that were in Broken Flute about how kids felt. But that book, it was really well done. And the group American Indians in Children's Literature, their articles are so thought-provoking. They help me think. So I answered
I
quickly.
love it. I'm gonna have my work cut out for me with show notes. Like I feel like it's gonna be super detailed because we've done a lot of references here.
Shelley,
But
I'm
I
impressed you
love
did
just
only
so
two.
yes. I was like, I think we got to 3. She was like, no, I'll name 3 authors and 2 books. But hey, I love it. The goal was really to give folks something to dive into. And then I have a little story about how we kind of ended up agreeing to this. But before we do, our last question was, how can people connect with you or any upcoming projects that you're working on? I know that folks can go on Facebook and join the group Living Books for All People and be a part of this conversation, this really collective curating of diverse voices and own voice literature. But are there other things where people might be able to connect with you?
Okay, I'll go first. Uh, Truth be told, I don't have a big online presence. So through the Living Books of All Peoples group is the best way to see what's going on. But I am on Goodreads, and occasionally I write quite a pointed review. So yeah, you can find me on Goodreads. I'm in there as artist space C, and I'm the only artist in Macau for sure. So you're certainly welcome to follow my reviews on there. I read pretty broadly, so there will be stuff on there that's canon and stuff that's sci-fi, as well as, you know, the living books of all people. And in terms of projects, you know, I don't have anything specific LBOAP wise, but we moved to Singapore a year and a half ago now. We left Macau, and as ever, we got a lot of unknown unknowns. My known unknowns are improving though, so you know, it's a good sign. So for myself and for my son's benefit, there's a lot of history and culture for me to try to find. So for example, we went to Bali for a holiday and there was a little used bookstore and they had like 50 Indonesian published in English contemporary literature books. So I bought them. And, you know, always take a spare suitcase, okay, when you travel internationally. So I
Wait,
bought
when you
so,
say
you know,
you
that's
bought
over a
them, you
year.
mean you bought all 50?
I don't know. I mean, I had 2 giant bags, like plastic bags that were breaking because, but you know, there was like a picture book about this Buddhist temple hill that was built, you know, stuff I don't know anything about. So I think that's my project, is to sort of, I'm not expert on China by any stretch, but after 15 years living there, I've got something that I can communicate, or at least, you know, try in my own way to sort of a broken flute any book that is about China that meant, but I'm not capable of that for this region. So that's my personal.
I love it. And what about you, Shelley? How can folks
So I
connect with you?
also have a pretty low, I think I can keep up with Facebook and that's it. But I also am on Goodreads, and I read a lot, and I feel like it's a great way to, I would love to have people connect on Goodreads, because I'd also like to see what other people are reading. That's one of the reasons I have too many things to read now. There's so many great suggestions that come through. I think my personal project may be to review more of the books that I read. That's sort of a discipline that I think I'd like to grow in, even if I just write the review for myself, to practice writing those things. And then my other project is planning year 10 for my son, because it's going to be 1800 to 1902, and there's so much that happens. I had kind of I was kind of feeling cool, like I knew what I wanted to do. There's a book on Reconstruction, really want to do. I had ideas for US history, but then thinking about the rest of the world, there's so much going on. There's so much going on. And so just in the last 2 or 3 days, I've been totally overwhelmed. So I'm like seeking the book that will tie in, through a biography or through journeys of a person, try in some of the major themes that were happening in that century, without making it too much. Because if less is more. Too many books, the ideas get diluted. So to try to find, living books for the big idea that will give this sort of spirit of the age. Yeah. So I feel like I should have started this project last year, but got a few months. So that's my project.
I love it. I feel like both of your answers were very Charlotte Mason influenced. Like it's like, well, what do you, because I part of what won me over with Charlotte Mason is that she was giving all this instruction about education and parameters and creating a paradigm, right, with connecting with nature and blah blah blah. But while saying, but as the educator, it's really important that you develop yourself. So the idea that the both of you are like, my main presence online is reading and narrating back what I read is the most Mason response we could have had. So I love that. I think that's a great challenge for folks who are interested in expanding what they're reading, right? To really connect on Goodreads, or even to seek out and know kind of your perspectives, having met you through the podcast, seeing what your reviews are like. So I just wanted to mention before we close, that I reached out to both of you as like a cold call direct message, and you're both so like caring and compassionate and thoughtful in your responses within the group, but that's like a curated space, and I think it's really easy to be like warm and empathetic in a particular setting and then to turn it off, because it takes a lot to be able to do that. So the fact that you were able to respond and share your hesitation and still agree to pre-meet, I really appreciate. But what happened is I was like, hey, I have this new podcast and let's let's make it happen, let's talk. But the fact that when I sent you the episode, there's a episode about the lighthouse keeper, Abby Burgess, like a teenager who gets thrown into the role, and what I was learning from her while I was trying to teach my daughter about her biography. The fact that your immediate response was, wait, I live in Maine. I love her. I felt was very serendipitous. And then our initial call, I was like, oh, these are voices that I really hope that we can amplify, because I think about, oh, wow, what if we just even got 5 or 10 more folks who were now on the prowl for like great books and then reporting out about the great books. So I really want to thank you both for your time. I really want to thank you for carving out time with the time difference. I really know that that's not a light lift. So thank you for that. And then even for both of you coordinating and taking a look at, hey, what might we say in the podcast? I mean, I just love it. And I will work on our show notes. But I really want to thank you. And I just wish you all the best as we continue as you continue moderating and administering the group. And as I continue contributing, that we can just really see what it grows into and evolves in.
Thanks.
So thanks. Yeah.
Thank
Thanks
you
again
so
to you
much,
both.
Sarah. This
Yeah.
has been a lot of fun. And the pre-call was
Yeah,
also
the pre-call was great.
I love it.
and it gave
So
me
I'm going to stop record. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say it gave me an excuse to go back and look at some of the old threads with you.
So,
And
okay,
do you remember
I'm
that video of Akala?
say it again.
Akala
Oh,
Sakna?
yes.
Yes,
Yes.
that is why I read his book, which is the best book about the 20th century that I've read
So I
yet.
haven't read. That's
Plus,
pretty
there
awesome.
we go. Please, if you do join our group, contribute like that. We would love it because we don't know anywhere near.
I love it.
And one thing I just want to mention about the group, kind of an apology, is we do have guides. We were
Oh, yes.
inspired by another group, and it's about 2 hours of small chunks. But we really think that if people join, they have to do the guides. But we really think you'll love doing the guides. That
Mm.
it'll give you a real understanding of who we are, but also where to find things, where some of the amazing resources we found are for you to go look. So I always feel apologetic that you've got to do guides if you're going to stay in the group. But I really am like, but if you do the guides, I think you're going to love them.
You're gonna love it.
So,
I'll start the show notes with the guides, and
good.
I think
Thank
it's
you.
so funny that you feel apologetic that you're like, if you're gonna join a group of readers, you might have to do a little bit of reading. So sorry. I love it. I think it'll be okay, but I'll start that with that note. And
Awesome.
I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
hit stop recording. Yeah.
Great.